The microphone felt heavier than it should have in my trembling hands. 2,000 people sat in complete silence below me, their faces turned upward like flowers seeking sunlight. But I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were locked on two specific faces in the third row: my parents. The same parents who had written check after check for my sister's college tuition while telling me there simply wasn't enough money left for mine. Their faces had gone completely pale. They knew what was coming. 4 years earlier, I had stood in our kitchen holding my acceptance letter to Stanford. My grades were perfect. My SAT scores were in the top percentile. I had worked 60 hours a week through high school, saving every penny I could scrape together. The letter in my hands represented everything I had dreamed of since I was 12 years old. My mother was washing dishes. She didn't even turn around when I spoke. I got in. That's nice, honey. Mom, I got into Stanford. Her hand stopped moving, the water kept running. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle splash against the ceramic plates. We've talked about this, she said finally. There's no money. But there had been money. 3 years of money for my sister's private liberal arts education. 3 years of my parents driving 6 hours each way to visit her on campus. 3 years of care packages and spring break trips and a brand new car for her 18th birthday. I had gotten a used bicycle with a broken chain. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could feel something breaking inside my chest, something that had been holding together my entire sense of family, of belonging, of worth. Sarah needed the financial support more than you do, my mother continued, her voice carefully neutral. You're more resourceful. Resourceful, that was their word for it. Their polite way of saying I had always been the one who figured things out alone, the one who didn't need help, the one who could handle disappointment. I folded the letter carefully and walked upstairs to my room. That night, I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every work-study program I could find. I wrote essays until my fingers cramped. I called financial aid offices until my voice went hoarse. 3 months later, I had pieced together a package that would cover most of my tuition. Not all of it, but most. I would graduate with debt. Sarah would graduate free and clear. The day I left for college, my father shook my hand like I was a business acquaintance. My mother hugged me briefly, her arms feeling thin and distant around my shoulders. Make us proud, she whispered. I wanted to ask her what would make them proud. Whether anything I did would ever be enough. Whether they had ever looked at me and felt the same warm glow of satisfaction they seemed to feel when they looked at Sarah. Instead, I said goodbye. College was brutal in ways I hadn't expected, not academically. The classes were challenging but manageable. The brutality was in the small moments. Watching my roommate's parents take him out to expensive dinners every weekend while I ate ramen noodles in our dorm room. Listening to classmates complain about their allowances while I worked midnight shifts at the campus library to afford textbooks. The worst part was the phone calls home, every Sunday, dutifully checking in. How's Sarah doing? I would ask, because I knew they wanted me to ask. And then, I would listen to 15 minutes of updates about her social life, her boyfriend, her internship at Dad's friend's marketing firm. When they asked about me, the conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes. That's wonderful, sweetheart, we're so glad you're doing well. But were they? Did they think about me during the week? Did they wonder how I was handling the pressure, the loneliness, the constant financial stress? I stopped calling as much. They didn't seem to notice. By sophomore year, I had found my rhythm. I was working 20 hours a week, maintaining a 4 GPA, and slowly building relationships with professors who saw something in me that my own family seemed to miss. Dr. Martinez in the English department became a mentor. She would invite me to faculty dinners and introduce me to visiting writers. She treated me like my thoughts mattered. You have a gift, she told me one evening after I had presented a paper on contemporary literature, not just for analysis, but for understanding how stories shape us, how they reveal truth. I wanted to tell her about my own story, about parents who loved conditionally, about sisters who got everything while you got nothing, about the way silence can cut deeper than any cruel word. Instead, I thanked her and went back to my dorm to study. Junior year brought internships. Sarah got hers through family connections. I got mine by writing 40 cover letters and interviewing with 12 different companies until someone finally saw my potential rather than my lack of network. The internship was at a small publishing house in the city. I commuted 2 hours each way, 3 days a week, sleeping in the office when I missed the last train rather than pay for a hotel. My supervisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, noticed my dedication. Most interns ask when they can leave, she said one evening as I was proofreading manuscripts at 8 o'clock. You ask what else you can do. I want to learn everything, I told her, and it was true. Every rejection letter I edited, every manuscript I reviewed, every meeting I sat in on taught me something about how the industry worked, how merit was recognized, how hard work eventually paid off. By the end of the summer, Claire offered me a part-time job for senior year. The pay was modest, but it was steady income and invaluable experience. When I told my parents about the job, my mother's response was predictable. That's nice, honey. Sarah's internship is going so well too. Her boss says she might have a full-time position waiting for her after graduation. Of course she did. Senior year arrived like a freight train. The course load was intense, my job at the publishing house was demanding, and I was working on my thesis while everyone else seemed to be coasting toward graduation. My thesis advisor, Dr. Chen, pushed me harder than any professor ever had. This work could be publishable, she told me one afternoon as we reviewed my latest draft. But publishable isn't good enough for you. This needs to be exceptional. Exceptional. The word followed me everywhere. In every late-night study session, every revision, every moment when I wanted to give up and settle for good enough. I thought about my parents, about the way they looked at Sarah with such obvious pride, about the way they looked at me with polite interest. I wanted them to look at me the way Dr. Chen did, the way Claire did, like I mattered, like I was worth investing in. My thesis defense was scheduled for 2 weeks before graduation. I had written about resilience in contemporary literature, examining how characters overcome systemic disadvantages through individual determination. It wasn't hard to find inspiration for the topic. The defense went better than I had dared to hope. The committee asked tough questions, but I was prepared. I had lived this research. When Dr. Chen announced that they were recommending my thesis for publication, I felt something shift inside my chest. Something that had been tight and defensive for 4 years finally loosened. A week later, Dr. Martinez called me into her office. I have some news, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. The department has selected you as this year's valedictorian. The words didn't register at first. I had been focused on just graduating, on landing a job, on proving that I could make it on my own merit without family support. Valedictorian, I repeated slowly. Your GPA is the highest in your class. Your thesis committee was unanimous in their praise. You've shown not just academic excellence, but the kind of character and determination we hope to inspire in all our students. That night, I called my parents to tell them about the honor. My mother answered on the 4th ring. Hi, sweetheart, how are you? I have some news, I said, my voice carefully steady. I've been selected as valedictorian. Silence. Then, that's wonderful, honey. What exactly does that mean? What did it mean? It meant 4 years of 18-hour days. It meant choosing work over social events, determination over self-pity, excellence over excuses. It means I'll be giving the graduation speech, I said. It's the highest academic honor the university gives. That's so nice, my mother said. Your father will be proud. We're both proud. But she didn't sound proud. She sounded distracted, polite. Will you be able to come to graduation? I asked. Of course, sweetheart, we wouldn't miss it. They had missed plenty. Every parents' weekend, every academic awards ceremony, every moment when I might have needed their encouragement. But they would come to graduation, because that was what parents were supposed to do. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final exams, graduation preparations, and speech writing. I rewrote my valedictorian address 7 times. Each draft felt either too angry, too sad, or too revealing. Dr. Martinez helped me with the final version. What do you want to say? She asked during our last revision session. The truth, I said without thinking. Which truth? I looked out her office window at students walking across campus. Students whose parents had paid their tuition without question. Students who had never wondered whether they were worth investing in. That sometimes the people who are supposed to believe in you most are the ones who believe in you least, and that you can succeed anyway. That's a powerful truth, she said quietly. But how you tell it matters. The goal isn't to hurt anyone, it's to help others understand. Help others understand. That became my guiding principle for the speech. The morning of graduation arrived gray and drizzly. I stood in my cap and gown, looking at myself in the mirror of the small hotel room where I was staying. My parents had offered to let me stay with them, but I had declined. I needed space to prepare mentally for what I was about to do. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. I sat on the stage with the other honors students, looking out at the sea of families. I found my parents in the third row. My mother was wearing a blue dress I had never seen before. My father wore his best suit. Sarah sat between them, looking bored. They had driven 3 hours to be here, the same distance they had driven countless times to visit Sarah at her college. When the dean introduced me, the applause seemed to echo from very far away. I stood and walked to the podium, my prepared speech folded in my pocket. But as I looked out at those 2,000 faces, as I saw my parents sitting straight and expectant, I realized I didn't need the paper. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. 4 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the silent auditorium. I learned an important lesson about belief. My mother shifted in her seat. My father's expression was watchful. I learned that the people who are supposed to believe in us don't always do so. That sometimes we have to choose between waiting for validation and creating our own worth. I paused, letting the words settle. In the audience, I could see some parents nodding, others looked uncomfortable. I graduated from this university with highest honors, but I also graduated with debt. Debt that I'm proud of, because every dollar represents my choice to invest in myself when others wouldn't. My parents' faces had gone pale. They knew. They understood what the speech was really about. Some of you had parents who saved for your education from the day you were born. Others, like me, had parents who chose to invest in other priorities. I was walking a careful line here, telling my truth without destroying my family. Dr. Martinez had been right about how to tell it. I want to speak to those of you who paid your own way, who worked multiple jobs while your classmates complained about their allowances, who ate ramen while others went out to dinner. Who wondered if anyone noticed how hard you were working? The silence in the auditorium was complete. I could see students crying, parents looking at their children with new eyes. You did notice. You noticed that hard work matters more than privilege, that character matters more than connections. That the validation you create for yourself is more powerful than any validation others can give you. I found my parents' faces again. My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. My father's jaw was tight, his hands clenched in his lap. Today, we graduate not just with degrees, but with the knowledge that we survived, that we succeeded not because the path was easy, but because we chose to walk it anyway. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. Students were standing, parents were standing, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. But I was only looking at two people. My parents remained seated, their faces pale and strained. I had told the truth. I had told it with grace, without naming names or assigning blame, but they knew. Everyone who needed to know, knew. After the ceremony, families clustered on the quad for pictures and celebrations. I stood alone for a moment, watching the chaos of reunions and congratulations. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. That was brave, Dr. Martinez said softly. Was it too much? I asked. It was exactly right. You honored your experience without dishonoring others. That takes wisdom. My parents approached slowly, uncertainty written across their faces. Sarah hung back, looking like she wanted to disappear. Honey, my mother began, her voice shaky. That speech. It was beautiful. my father interrupted, though his voice sounded strained. You've become an incredible young woman. I had waited 4 years to hear those words, 4 years of wondering if they were proud of me, if they saw my potential, if they regretted their choices. Now, standing in my cap and gown with my diploma in hand, I realized their approval no longer mattered the way it once had. I had built something stronger than their validation. I had built my own worth. Thank you for coming, I said, and I meant it. Not because they deserved thanks for doing the bare minimum, but because their presence had given me the audience I needed for my truth. We took pictures, awkward, stiff pictures where everyone smiled but no one looked entirely comfortable. They took me to lunch afterward, the conversation careful and surface level. What are your plans now? Sarah asked, speaking to me directly for the first time all day. I have a job offer at a publishing house in New York, I said. I start in 2 weeks. My mother's eyebrows rose. A job offer? When did this happen? 3 months ago. They offered me a position based on my internship work. You didn't tell us, my father said. I didn't think you'd be interested in the details. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things, years of unspoken things. Finally, my mother cleared her throat. We should have done better by you, she said quietly. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from her, and maybe that was enough. I turned out okay, I said. And I had, not because of them, but despite them. Not through their investment, but through my own determination. Not with their belief, but with my own conviction. The drive home was quiet. I sat in the back seat watching familiar landscapes roll past, thinking about the future I had built for myself. The job in New York represented more than employment. It represented freedom, the freedom to define my own worth, to choose my own family, to create the life I wanted rather than waiting for someone else to give it to me. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Sarah was getting married, and they wanted me to be in the wedding party. I declined politely. I was busy building my career, my life, my own version of success. 2 years after graduation, my first article was published in a major literary magazine. I sent my parents a copy, not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted them to see what I had built from the foundation they had refused to provide. My mother called the day after she received it. We read your article, she said. It's beautiful, we're so proud of you. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Not because their pride validated my success, but because their pride finally matched what I had known about myself all along. I had always been worth investing in. I had always been capable of exceptional things. I had always mattered. It had just taken them longer to see it than it had taken me to prove it. 5 years later, I published my first book. It was dedicated to Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen and Claire, and everyone who had believed in me when my own family couldn't. My parents came to the book launch. They sat in the front row and applauded when I read from the first chapter. Afterward, they bought copies and asked me to sign them. To the parents who taught me that the most important investment is the one you make in yourself, I wrote. My mother read the inscription and looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We failed you, she said simply. You gave me exactly what I needed, I replied, just not in the way you intended. Because they had given me something valuable, though not something they had meant to give. They had given me the knowledge that I could survive without their support. That I could build a life entirely from my own determination and merit. They had taught me that other people's failure to see my worth didn't diminish that worth. That love is not always expressed through financial investment. That sometimes the greatest gift parents can give a child is the opportunity to prove they don't need them. I think about that graduation speech often, about the moment when I chose to tell my truth with grace rather than anger. About the way my parents' faces went pale as they realized their choices had been witnessed, judged, and ultimately forgiven. I think about all the students who hear similar speeches and see themselves reflected in the words, who realize they are not alone in feeling overlooked by the people who should have seen them first. And I think about the parents who hear those speeches and recognize themselves in the careful words, who understand, perhaps for the first time, the cost of their choices. The microphone that day felt heavy in my hands, but the words that came from it were weightless. Truth, when spoken with grace, has a way of lifting everything it touches. Even the people who thought they were too heavy to rise.